Welcome. My name is Penny Rosema, and you're listening to the Cookware Manufacturers Association Interview Podcast. One of CMA's goals is to keep our members informed. And in this interview with Rosemary Coates, we are going to cover the topic of U.S. manufacturing and reshoring. Now, you can find more information about Rosemary and the Reshoring Institute at reshoringinstitute.org. If you're watching this on YouTube, you'll see a slide that shows you contact information, phone numbers, and the web address as well. That's reshoringinstitute.org. Hello, Rosemary, and welcome to our interview.
Thank you. I'm glad to be here.
Oh, we're so glad to have you. Rosemary, I'd like to just start out very briefly at a very base foundational level. Could you define the term reshoring and give us a little information about the Reshoring Institute and how that came about?
Sure. So reshoring is the common term that's used, but really what what we're talking about is global manufacturing strategy. And by that I mean, what do you manufacture in what part or what country in the world, and what can you bring back to the U.S.? So we're not particularly an advocate of bringing everything back. For example, we really don't want the 23 cent an hour t-shirt production back because that doesn't pay a living wage. But we do want advanced manufacturing to come back to the U.S. where it provides good jobs and good investment opportunity. So we call it reshoring, but it involves really thinking through your global strategy. And then the Reshoring Institute was started about 5 years ago with a dual mission. First and foremost, to help companies that are trying to bring manufacturing back to the U.S., and we do that through our research and through small consulting projects and general information to the public. And the other mission is to teach graduate student interns about manufacturing, because in the last 20 years or so, there's been almost no education around manufacturing at the university level. So there's engineering education, there's business education, but no one who is specifically focused on manufacturing environments. So, and we know that these graduate students are going to become the business leaders of the future. And so we want to expose them and educate them to manufacturing environments across the U.S. So in doing that, we've partnered with, right now we have 5 universities, and we're about to take on 2 more. So right now we have the University of San Diego, University of Southern California, Santa Clara University, St. Louis University, and Rutgers University in New Jersey. And we're going to add the University of Arkansas and another one we're still talking to right now for the fall semester, and we'll have interns from all of those universities helping us.
Well, that was very helpful. I like the point you made that reshoring is really about global manufacturing strategy. It isn't about bringing everything back. It's focus on the advanced manufacturing. And
Right.
Then your dual mission with the Institute to obviously help bring back manufacturing back where it's appropriate, but then the educational side, I wasn't aware of that. So that sounds fantastic, and a lot of good work you're doing there. Rosemary, what are the current trends in this reshoring or global manufacturing strategy? Is there anything hot on the top of your list when you get asked that question?
Yeah, it's very interesting because 20 or 25 years ago, the trend and what everyone was doing was offshoring their production to China primarily. And I have my own management consulting firm, and I was helping a lot of companies do that. In fact, I wrote a book about manufacturing in China. Sourcing and manufacturing in China, because that's what my clients wanted. They were looking for low-cost environments and so forth. And there really wasn't much thought given to global manufacturing strategy. In fact, a lot of operations people weren't even at the C-level in an organization. So, they were a level down. There weren't strategic decisions made. And then actually what really triggered it, I think, was the 2012 presidential election between Barack Obama and Mitt Romney. And both of them were China bashing like crazy, blaming China for everything. And, some of my clients started talking, it really triggered a lot of thought, and some of my clients started talking about the possibility of manufacturing in the U.S. Would it be possible? And that's really what triggered this kind of trend and this rethinking of global manufacturing strategy, and the introduction of a lot of supply chain people, which when I say that, that includes manufacturing for me, a lot of supply chain people that were offered a seat at the executive level, at the C-level in organizations, and this sort of strategic thought about the world landscape for manufacturing. And so, that was kind of the trend. Now, today, we know that based on a couple of surveys, one big one by the Boston Consulting Group, that 54% of all American companies over $1 billion are either reshoring now or considering a reshoring project. So that's a lot. That's more than half of the nation's big companies. We also know that there are a lot of small and medium businesses everywhere in America that are also considering ways they might be able to bring manufacturing back to the U.S. or start manufacturing here. So there's a serious trend. And of course, with the recent tax cuts for manufacturers, that's helped as well. And all of a sudden, manufacturing's on fire in the U.S.
That's I can just follow the trace of that conversation. I remember seeing all of that happen as it happened. What I didn't realize was the 54% of the companies that are over $1 billion. Is that what you said?
Yes.
Are either looking at or actively into reshoring strategies.
Right.
Very interesting. What are they finding the big obstacles are?
Well, first of all, labor rates obviously, are very attractive in other overseas locations. And so that's why when we help companies with total cost of ownership, and when we look at this, we have to look at how much labor content is in what you're producing. So high labor content products, t-shirt production, for example, even athletic shoes production requires a lot of touch, a lot of manufacturing labor. And for those products, they really belong in a low-cost labor environment. So when we're looking at, what we could bring back in the U.S., we have to look at products that production lines that can actually be automated, or where we can extract those labor costs. Because when you look at the comparison, we took a job description for a machine tool operator and looked at it around the cost of that around the world. And in China, the labor cost for that kind of machine tool operator is $4.63 an hour. In the U.S., the average cost is $26.10 an hour. And in Europe, excuse me, in Europe, it's $33 and change an hour. So you can see that even if labor rates quintuple in China, it's still not going to be on the same par as the U.S. So that means that we have to look for ways to bring advanced manufacturing back to the U.S., where we can extract that hourly labor cost in order to make production costs competitive. And that means we have to go to an automated environment and so forth. So the obstacles, the question you asked were obstacles. Certainly leaving a foreign country is a big obstacle, which we can talk about later. But also, the extracting the labor, automating the production line, it often requires investment in capital equipment. So there's a CapEx component to it. Land, construction, that sort of thing. So, it's a financial decision in many cases. It's also what we would call economic patriotism. And that's where a lot of executives will say, I want to bring manufacturing back here because it's good for America,
right. Yeah.
and making a decision based on that.
Yes, I can understand the patriotism. That is a hot topic around here lately, which is going to bring us to the next question that I have is how is it possible to get the cost of manufacturing products competitive in the U.S.? I heard you say automation and getting, advanced manufacturing. Is that all it is? I mean, is that the key point of that, or is there something else we need to be aware of?
Yeah, well, it's a couple of things. So what we call local for local is manufacturing in the local environment for your local customer base. So let me give you an example. GE under Jack Welch in the 90s and 80s and 90s pretty much shipped all of their production to China and across Asia. So they produced water heaters and shipped all the water heater production to China, and they shut down factory after factory in the U.S., including a big site in Louisville, Kentucky. When Jeff Immelt took over a few years ago, he challenged his staff to try to find a way that they could bring manufacturing back to the U.S. So what the engineers did was design a new product, a water heater product that is heat on demand. So when you turn on the tap, hot water's there, which makes total sense. I mean, for me, I'm off traveling somewhere, I'm in China or something, and I have one of those traditional water heaters in my garage, and my God, it heats water, even though there's nobody home for 6 months. It's there heating water. So that doesn't really make sense. But a heat-on-demand water heater, it's got a chip on it, makes perfect sense. It heats water when you need it and immediately. The problem is it's about 3 times more expensive than a traditional water heater. So we know, and GE knew, that their customer base was in the U.S., where people would see the benefits and spend the extra money for a heat-on-demand water heater, and Western Europe. So those were the 2 big markets. So what they did was design a brand new product that was geared towards this market. Then they re-engineered their production line over and over again until they extracted labor out of it, made it automated. And then they reopened Appliance Park in Louisville, Kentucky, and set up manufacturing there to produce products for the U.S. market. That's what we call local for local. Mm-hmm. They, in the meantime, left their traditional water heater production in China because the market there is growing at something like 17% per year. Mm-hmm. So as China's, the Chinese people are moving into the middle class, they need water heaters for their housing and so forth. So that they're producing that locally, and they do also still import those low-end water heaters. But the high-end stuff is made here. And in the process, they have upskilled the workers in the Louisville plant. So the workers that used to do, routine assembly and that sort of thing are now operating robots or operating computers that operate manufacturing. And they put 4,000 people back to work in Louisville. I mean, it's just amazing. It's an amazing success story. They also produce high-end wine refrigerators and coolers, high-end refrigerators, high-end dishwashers, and so forth at Appliance Park. So it's pretty cool, pretty great success story.
That is awesome. So they're focusing, the thing I heard about that, your conversation there was local for local, using the local environment, and then feeding and local might not be just a state or a region. It could be the U.S., as in the example you gave with the heat-on-demand water heaters. Sure.
A local market, yeah. So the U.S. market, for example, yes.
So that would be an example of how they, extracted or started something new and produced in the U.S. But for companies that might be actually extracting out of a foreign supplier or foreign manufacturing site, how difficult is it to pull out? And what are the kind of the warning signs or things to be aware of?
Yeah, it's I get this with a lot of my clients. They're like, "Oh, great idea. Let's manufacture in the U.S. and we can make it happen," and so forth. And what they don't recognize is that there's also a cost and a difficulty level of extracting yourself from a foreign location. So in China, for example, you have to give the government notice that you're shutting down the plant. There's some laws in the U.S. that if you were going to shut something down, you would have to do that too. But in China, the bureaucracy is a little more onerous, and it might take 6 months to get permission to shut down. So that's one thing. Now, you could just turn off the lights and lock the door and go home, get on a plane. But the problem with that is if you may be locked out of China then forever, you may never be able to go back. And if you look at the world markets, the growth markets are clearly in Asia and will be for the next 30 years or so. So you don't want to shoot yourself in the foot either. You want to do things properly. So that's one thing. The other thing is, another thing is the employees in China are all on employment contracts. By law, they have to have a contract. So if you're gonna shut down a plant there or shut down a production line there, you have to be prepared to pay out the contract. So if the Chinese worker has a 1-year contract, for example, you have to finish paying the wages for the whole year, even if you shut down in July. And it might be a 2-year contract and so forth. So that's another financial hurdle that you have to think about and get over. And then the third thing that's fairly important is if you have provided equipment or have taught the Chinese how to make your product. So if you've provided equipment to the manufacturing site, you're never going to get it back because the Chinese look at that as now part of their infrastructure. So you shipped it over there, even though you say it's my equipment and might say that in the contract, you're never going to get it out of China. You got to write it off. And I've had a few of those sad conversations with CFOs also. Okay. And then also, if you've taught a foreign manufacturer, whether it's in China or anywhere, how to make your product, and now you say we're leaving, they're not going to just forget how to make your product. They're going to continue.
The equipment and they got the you got the talent. So
exactly, they're going to continue to make it, sell it under another brand name, probably in the third world. So you have to be very cognizant of your intellectual property as well.
I got it. That's a tough one. So are customers willing to pay more for products when they're made in the U.S.? How many times have you been asked that question?
Yeah, that's really interesting. So Walmart is famous for doing studies like this, and they'll tell you that they have positive survey results that customers are willing to pay up to 15% more for a product that's made in the U.S. Okay. And so we use the 15% as a target. So if we can get the cost of manufacturing, the cost of goods sold essentially within 15% of a foreign cost, we know we can sell the product. So so over and over and over again, they've proved that customers are willing to pay more for a product that is made in the USA and labeled as such.
Very, very interesting to know. And so now when you talk about labeled as such, how does it get a little tricky with this made in the USA label? Does it have to be 100% of the product made in the US? What I understand is the challenge, especially in the cookware industry, is that, you might have the handle or the knob or, some portion of what you have in that package that's not made in the US. Maybe even the screws, right? That screw the handle on. How does that impact it?
Yeah, so the Federal Trade Commission controls the labeling requirements for products made in the USA. And actually, we have a whole section on our website about labeling if anyone's interested. And so there's federal regulations, and then some of the states have additional regulations. But you have to comply with the federal regulations if you're going to sell across state lines. So that's what we always recommend. Now, the thing about that is the federal regulations say that here's a quote, all or nearly all of the value of the product has to be of U.S. origin. So how do you define nearly all? So what we can tell you is that in some court cases, because there have been a few of these that have been tried, The federal government usually rules it's got to be north of 95% of the value has to be manufactured in the U.S.
And that value
So,
is cost of good, right? Value, not retail.
right, correct.
Okay.
Cost of goods, and and it's based on the bill of materials. So what we've done is we've exploded bill of materials for several of our clients, and we can look at, and labor costs also. So we can look at, where parts come from, because especially in electronics, for example, some component parts are not even made here. So
Right.
you have to import some things. So if you have at least 95% of the value of the goods, so that's all the exploded bill of material, component parts, as well as labor, then you can label it made in the USA. If not, and we've worked with clients that, for example, I had a lighting client was making lighting products, and they got to 86%. And so what we recommended they do on their label was to put assembled in the USA from 86% US parts or something
Sure.
like that, something similar, because that tells the consumer the truth, right?
Right.
And what we found in testing, that consumers would much rather buy something like that than a product that's just simply labeled assembled in the US.
I see. That other added definition of how many of those components were,
Right.
if you can validate it up to 86% of it, it's going to sway my purchase decision then.
Exactly.
Exactly. Wow, what fantastic information, Rosemary. I'm just going to remind our listeners that we're talking with Rosemary Coates. She's from the Reshoring Institute, and you can find more information about Reshoring Institute at their website. And also, it sounds like information on labeling and some other valuable stuff. I perused the website. Looks like there's a great wealth of information there, and we'll include that link when we post this. So that's at reshoringinstitute.org. Their email is there. Rosemary's email address is there, and a phone number that you can reach out to get more information on any one of the topics that we've covered here. Rosemary, we thank you so much for your time and the information that you've provided. Do you have any other general words of advice for executives that are looking at I don't want to say reshoring because I want to use our original term, advanced manufacturing focus, their global manufacturing strategy?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a real opportunity for companies to have a long, hard look at what they're doing globally, to assess the possibility of bringing manufacturing back. The other thing is, this is not your grandfather's manufacturing. I like to say that because we're not going back to 1960s manufacturing, and people that work in the manufacturing world will recognize that it's not like it was 50 years ago. So, it used to be you put, pegs and holes and did that for 8 hours a day. Today, you have to learn how to run the robot that's putting the pegs and holes. So that's what we would call advanced manufacturing. So the skills have changed as well. And, it's really, I would encourage everybody in the manufacturing environment to really think through the possibilities of bringing manufacturing here, because it's critically important to our economy.
Agreed. And thank you so much for the work that you and your organization are doing, the Reshoring Institute. So your sources of information for especially our members in the cookware and bakeware industry, I can't tell you how much we appreciate you taking time on the call. And for our listeners, last reminder, you're listening to the Cookware Manufacturers Association, an interview with Reshoring Institute. The Cookware Manufacturing Association, you can find more information about our organization by going to our website, which is cookware.org. And we'll have that link posted as well when you listen to this on YouTube. But we need your feedback so we can continue to keep you informed. Was this audio interview valuable to you? Do you have questions or topics you'd like to suggest for future interviews? If you do, let us know go on our website and you'll see my email address there, which is prosema@cookware.org. You will find this podcast on YouTube as well as on our website. And we appreciate your time, Rosemary. I hope you enjoy your afternoon. And thanks again for this wealth of information.
All right. Thank you.
And thank you, listeners. I hope you all have a great day.